And we are back. Our featured guest tonight is an African and American filmmaker whose touching debut film, Farewell, Amor, has taken the film festival circuit by storm and has helped open some very important discussions about immigrant life and America more broadly. Please give a warm weekly show welcome to writer-director Ekwa Msangi. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
Before we get to the film, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I believe I read that you were born in the U.S. to African parents and then moved back to Africa at a very young age, right?
Yes, correct. My parents were Fulbrights in California when I was born in Oakland. And my family's from Tanzania in East Africa, but we moved to Kenya. And I grew up in Kenya and then came back to the U.S. as a late teen to go to college.
Now, were you aware of the changes happening around you at that young age? I mean, do you remember any change in particular?
Do you mean political changes?
Yes.
Or what do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of impossible not to know. I mean, I think it's true in a lot of African countries. People are very hyper aware of politics all the time. It didn't affect me personally, thankfully, but I was very aware of what the adults were worried about. I remember when there was the genocide in Rwanda, for example, a lot of my friends' families had been killed and, murdered and all of that kind of stuff. So I do remember that kind of stuff very vividly.
Now, my wife is from India. And I know in Tanzania and Kenya, there's a lot of Indian influence because of trade. Did
Indeed.
the local stations play Bollywood movies there?
Yes, but at that time, Bollywood wasn't as big. They had a lot of Indian movies because a lot of the movie theaters are owned by Indian business people. But they were, I want to say, like religious films. So they had these epic, like 5-hour long films about like all of the gods and goddesses in Hindu culture, I guess. So I definitely grew up with a lot of that.
So it wasn't as much of the mass dancing, choreographed
There was
scenes.
some of that, but it was kind of early. That came a little, like the Bollywood as we know it came a little bit later. But they did have some of that. It was, although most of it was the religious stuff.
Now, you've mentioned in other interviews a seminal moment in your life, seeing Spike Lee's School Daze.
Yeah.
What did it feel like seeing that for the first time? I mean, did the world kind of sort of open up before your eyes, filmmaking wise?
It did. I mean, I was young. I was probably 10 or so, 9 or 10, and I didn't understand a lot of the politics that he discussed in the film, colorism and, sort of the classism and things of that nature. But it was the first time that I had seen a film with an all-black cast, and they introduced the film by saying that the director was black too, and it was just kind of like, oh, I didn't know that people could do that. So it kind of revolutionized my world in terms of like, oh, I could also do that. Like I could do that. And I mean, Kenya's a British colony or ex-British colony. And so we do musicals all day long. And School Daze is a musical. So I could definitely understand that aspect of it. And I was like, I could do that.
How did you find your way back to the States?
I have 2 older brothers. They both were going to school and living in the States at the time. So when I finished high school, my parents essentially just sent me to live with my eldest brother and start school because that's what you're supposed to do. So I came back and it was great because my brothers both really loved movies. And I kind of showed up with this like, I'm going to be a filmmaker, but I had no plan for that. And they were really wonderful in terms of like, all right, well, maybe we should watch a bunch of films. And you said you saw Spike Lee. Let's learn about Spike Lee. Let's watch all of his films. At that time, Spike used to release like a companion book with all of his films. And so I read all of his books, checked them out at the library, found out he went to NYU. So then I was like, okay, I'll go to NYU. And, so they were really key in helping me to actually develop the idea of becoming a filmmaker beyond it just being an idea.
Now, I know that you've had a couple of award-winning shorts. but you've talked about it before. Why do you think it was so hard initially in New York to find acceptance for your work?
Yeah, it's in the US, there's a very particular model for how films are made and what is considered a viable project to invest in. You know, we don't have as much public funding as Europeans do. There is no public funding really, especially for narrative film. You can get some for documentary, but not really for narrative. And so when you're talking about African film, African filmmakers, um, the Hollywood model has been very specific about what they consider to be sort of like a sellable film. Um, and that tends to be, or has tended to be, a famous African American person playing the lead, or a story about a white person in Africa having some sort of experience, falling in love, finding themselves, finding their voice, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't usually include African actors, African lead stories, because that has not been considered financially viable. So it's taken a while.
And I've heard others talk about what it means to them to be an African or African American filmmaker, especially right now.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
I mean, it's like a superpower to me, to be able to not only have your voice heard or have a platform, which is all important, but also like it's more than having a platform to just say what you mean. It's because I'm not just giving speeches. It's about being able to connect with people emotionally, which is the place where people begin to, when you can feel something. It's one thing to like theoretically understand an issue, but when you can physically like feel something or feel like you can relate to something with your emotions, that's a whole different ball game. And so being able to be a writer and a director to make the images that can make you feel something, that's equivalent to magic to me.
And one of the things, and we're going to show a clip of the film after the break. But one of the things that I like about the film, and I'm going to let you explain after the break what the film is about. But it has one certain kind of, I guess, and I don't want to ruin. I want to let you talk about it. But at the core of it, even in the backfield of it, is it's still kind of a love story.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is, like you said, it doesn't have Denzel Washington as the lead, and it's not about a love story between like you said, some Caucasian with an African. It's people. It's just people. Regardless of the color of the skin, regardless where they came from, it's people. And I think that helps people of different races or nationalities realize that people are people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that was important to me too, because there's so few images. I certainly didn't grow up with any images of Black African people in love or fighting for love or trying to be close, trying to be together, connected, in a familial way, in a romantic way, consenting to sex or intimacy is like, we never actually get to see that. And a lot of people take that for granted, but I do think it actually has a very big impact on never being able to see yourself in a romantic or intimate setting. It's like, what does that make you feel about what's possible for you in your life?
I think there was a period in American television where you had traditional African-American families in a family unit. And then for a period of time, it went away from that. Even when you had shows that frankly still had somewhat racial undertones, like Good Times and The Jeffersons. I mean, they still played off the black versus white thing, but at the end of the day, there was still a core family unit. But then they went, for the longest time, television went towards broken families when they would do television about African Americans. So I mean, that's one of the things I love about this film is the way it does tell that love story. And so we're going to go to a break real quick. You've got time to hang out, right?
Yep,
Okay, so
absolutely.
then we'll be right back with Ekwa Msangi right after the break.